This video goes into detail about the stories of both Cronos the New Dawn and Dead of Darkness, including their endings. So if you want to avoid spoilers, please play the games before watching on. Perhaps the first detail that you'll be struck by as you play Cronos the New Dawn is how it marries Soviet-era brutalist architecture with a post-apocalyptic cassette futurism. This world ended in December 1981, giving its ruins that unique and uniquely unnerving aesthetic, with a soundtrack to match. Soon after, you will notice the grotesqueries that populate this wasteland. Once human, but now something else. Orphans. The result of the change. A pandemic which not only left the world a ruin full of mutants, but also a landscape scarred by gravitational anomalies and scabbed over with winding, reaching masses of flesh. Making her way through these creatures and the ruins in which they roam is the Traveller, an entity of arguably equal mystery and fear to the post-apocalypse that she apparently works to correct. We know nothing of her beyond the designation ND3576, and that she acts on behalf of something known as the Collective.
Such is our calling. Such is our calling.
The Traveller's mission, the vocation, is to harvest and preserve the essences of select humans from before the outbreak. The tools that she uses for this task are not subtle in their appearance or their usage, which is why when faced with them, her targets recoil in fear, and afterwards they're presumed to have been the victims of a murder in the most gruesome fashion. But instead, these targets get to survive a catastrophe that would have truly killed them. They get to live, after a fashion. Their consciousness preserved digitally so it can be uploaded to the Collective. The preservation of life might be seen as a noble motive, saving people from the apocalypse to come, so that they might live forever as part of the Collective. Except that what is left in the wake of the extraction is a corpse, the victim, to all appearances, of a brutal and merciless murder. And the inhuman visage of the Traveller stands as a portent of doom to those who see it and live to tell what they witnessed. By contrast, as you start Dead of Darkness, Velvet Island in the Celtic Sea off the coast of Britain and Ireland appears as close to paradise as you could imagine. Warm and tranquil, with sickness virtually unknown to the inhabitants. It's only once mild Wyndham digs deeper that it becomes apparent that all benefits that the residents of Velvet Island experience are built upon a foundation of torture, murder, and unimaginable horror. A private detective and ex-cop, haunted by the loss of his daughter Becca and wife Catherine years before, Miles is invited to Velvet Island by wealthy landowner Charles Graham with the promise of answers about that incident. But when he arrives, alongside Olivia, who's been recruited as a nurse in the island's psychiatric facility, he discovers that Charles is missing, and prodigal son William Graham, thought dead, has returned with his own daughter Kathy, who bears a startling resemblance to Becca. Before he can even begin to piece any of this together, there is a disturbance. A member of the island's staff is found dead, viciously torn into by something. Then island groundskeeper Owen kidnaps Kathy and wounds William's wife Ophelia, and the dead begin to rise.
Oh my God, what in the name of...
Hold them off! Get her to safety, now!
Where did you get the...
Fucking move, goddammit!
In the aftermath of this chaos, Miles' exploration of Graham Manor, and then the rest of the island, reveals that some immeasurable power dwells beneath the island. More than that, is the island. Its essence and influence bound up in the air that they breathe and the food that they eat. The Graham family, In return for the privileges this being grants, feed it in order to keep it dormant. The torture and murder of untold numbers of innocents in the service of prolonged life. Except that those who are sacrificed don't really die, but are instead bound up within the consciousness of the living island. It feeds upon them, just as the inhabitants feed upon it when they eat and breathe, and it absorbs their essence into its own. The change that mars Cronos' post-apocalyptic Poland is also defined by this subsuming of the individual to the hive mind. But the orphans are not the change, merely its cast-offs. So called because despite their infection and mutation, they have been left behind. So they wander about seeking other organisms to merge with, something that the traveller must use fire to prevent in combat. Because when living orphans merge with the bodies of orphans she has killed, they become stronger and deal more damage. The change itself is represented in the biomass that has overtaken so much of the landscape. Much like the mycelium of a fungus, it serves as the roots that link together and contain the greater part of what was once humanity. Our new flesh. This phrase isn't used in Cronos: The New Dawn, but it is used in Dead of Darkness. In both tales, the human race faces being overtaken by something older than time, which mutates us and absorbs the greater part of us into its network, while its waste takes the form of zombie-adjacent monstrosities. But only in Dead of Darkness do the agents of this hive mind articulate their position, telling us that surrendering to the new flesh is inevitable. This phrase, new flesh, comes from the 1983 David Cronenberg film Videodrome. In that movie, like in the two games we're discussing here, humanity faces a monstrous transformation. In this case, the result of a technological rather than biological pandemic, but still with Cronenberg's trademark use of the visceral, the gory, and distorted amalgamations of the flesh that is also the hallmark of so much cosmic horror. The Graham family's generational calling to keep the island dormant through sacrifice is at odds with prodigal son William's desire to wake the entity up and spread its influence across the globe. After learning at a young age of what his father was doing, he suffered an accident where he fell into the same pit as a sacrifice and was only barely pulled out alive. But not without undergoing change, becoming more openly cruel in his manner due to the psychic link opened with the entity. His condition reached a point where, desperate to treat him, his father agreed to let an investor called Gaspar Blackwood take him away with the promise of finding a cure to his condition. Instead, Blackwood faked William's death and used his leverage to gain access to Velvet Island in order to conduct experiments. Under the umbrella of the New Gaia project, he sought to harness the island's powers for himself. And when Becca became very ill, the clinical trial that Miles and Catherine signed their daughter up for was part of the same project. She was, in fact, the only viable subject, which is why she was taken and used to create a hybrid, Kathy being a genetic mix of William, Ophelia, and Becca. The next step in the evolution of the entity, and it would be free to go wherever it pleased if William and Kathy were successful in their attempts to merge with the heart of Velvet Island.
This is the dawn of the new flesh.
It's not working, damn it!
There's only one way left.
What? Are you?
No! What have you done?
We've already seen that Cronos' orphans also seek to merge with others as a way to sustain their life and increase their power. But this merging, easily disrupted with fire, is but a pale imitation of the much greater merging represented by the change, that they are no more than rejects of. The resultant biomass can also be burned away when it blocks the traveller's path, but it is strongly implied as we journey through the game that the change is much more than a mere body horror nightmare. After all, if the collective seeks to save humanity from the change, which is the only thing that we, or indeed the traveller, know about them, then why do this by harvesting selected essences to upload to a databank? Harvesting the essences requires time travel, and this is why the traveller is awakened to travel through the wasteland of New Dawn in the first place. to make her way through the ruins and anomalies in order to find a suitable jumping off point that will lead her to her target in the past. Nor is this the kind of time travel that requires staying hidden and non-interference, not only because the traveller's attire is far from inconspicuous, but also because the harvesting necessitates leaving a corpse behind that wasn't there before, and for the people in the past, a gruesome murder mystery. As the traveller goes deeper into New Dawn in search of additional subjects, she discovers that sightings of other travellers in the past have fueled a deep paranoia in those who have seen them. Is the government using them to conduct secret experiments? Are they tied to the murders? Could they be the cause of the change itself? The latter is emphatically denied within the story, and there is no reason to doubt the denial. But this raises further questions, especially in light of the answer to the other questions being a definitive yes. After extracting her first target, a conspiracy theorist called Edward Wisniewski, the traveller comes across another agent of the collective called the Warden. His role is to keep watch over and maintain the equipment that the travellers use, or rather, used, because he also reveals that the traveller is the first of her kind to awaken in a while, something having previously stopped the awakening of travellers and the pursuit of the vocation. As a result, the Warden not believing that the collective would send anybody else, the machine used to allow essences to ascend into the collective has fallen into disrepair. Urging the Warden to fix it, the traveller continues with the vocation, because Edward believes that everything started in the steelworks, and that the collective was the cause of it, and that is the next step in the traveller's journey. The steelworks is, in fact, the cause of the outbreak, the blast furnace catalysing a reaction that awoke something far too old to quantify, causing the government in turn to quarantine the place in their efforts to contain what had been unleashed. As the steelworkers trapped within fought both to stay alive and to resist their forced imprisonment, they received support from the wider community, already having a heroic reputation for their past efforts organising to fight for workers' rights. This was both the incentive and excuse for the government to clamp down on the wider population, heavily restricting what was permitted for the greater collective good as they saw it. This contradiction and struggle between the authoritarian collectivism of the government, the more bottom-up collectivism of the organised workers, and the rights of the individual is something that will be reflected in the post-apocalypse when we talk more about the journey of the traveller, the Warden, and the collective. But first, we need to talk about how, in the midst of this past dynamic, the government managed to get its hands on a traveller known as the Pathfinder. The traveller's next target, after Edward, is Artur Barika, who had entered the steelworks alongside Dr. Weronika Kaminsky to search for Artur's brother Gabriel. However, Gabriel is infected, and Artur blames the traveller and others like her for bringing the change. This is when he reveals that he met another traveller before the outbreak, who was captured by the military. The traveller then heads to the hospital in pursuit of Dr. David Zibert, who was once in charge of experimenting on the captured traveller. She finds him infected and learns from Veronica that she was the target of this traveller, who called himself the Pathfinder. After extracting Zibert's essence, or to be more precise, the essence of Zibert and Angela, with whom he merged once infected, she also learns that the doctor's daughter Eliza helped him to hide the Pathfinder away in an abbey. Unfortunately, the Pathfinder is already dead, and Eliza has become an orphan. As an aside, it is worth noting that Eliza's infection leaves her uniquely sapient, fused with the Abbey's altar in a unique vision of many grasping hands connected to a single voice, as she sends her flock of smaller orphans out as fodder to face the traveller. At once a compelling commentary on the nature of organised religion, and, in Eliza's explicit rejection of God, on the secular forces that sought to stamp out religion whilst utilising similar rhetorical tools for collective control. Just as Eliza had rejected God in favour of the new flesh,
We are those who reject gifts from
So in turn, the traveller discovers that the Pathfinder has lost faith in the collective and the vocation, explaining not only his refusal to harvest Veronica's essence, but also his subsequent efforts to sabotage the collective. He saw the beauty in humanity's imperfection and control over its own destiny, and refused to see that lost by dehumanizing them through making them cogs in a machine. He follows this up with a warning for any traveller who might follow.
Don't trust in the collective. All that matters to them is their own hunger.
We never learn who the collective are. Not really. The traveller views them as seeking to save humanity from the change, and the idea that they caused it is denied in the text. But what if, while not the cause of the change, they are the result of it? After all, they seek to merge as greedily as the orphans do. It's just that theirs is a merging of consciousness rather than flesh. Even if they are not the outward expression of the hive mind that controls the great spreading biomass which emerged from the steelworks blast furnace, even if they are truly trying to prevent it, their goal is so similar as to be indistinguishable.
Well, although the change seems cruel and painful, it is what led to the collective origin in the finale. Like a hideous cocoon from which the new face of the human race blossomed. But those who never managed to come together in time.
They became orphans.
Yes, the orphans. Multi-organisms desperately roaming the barren lands in search of those with whom they could merge. Howling with longing, they caricaturely try to imitate the great union accomplished by those who were more fortunate. Those who caught on to the train of evolution. The train to eternity.
It is in opposition to this coercive, authoritarian collectivism that the Pathfinder, like the steelworkers quarantined in their workplace, fought to preserve the collective of individuals, humanity. But in doing so, unlike the steelworkers, he stood alone. So where they were doomed by their lack of power in the face of much greater forces, so he was doomed by the lack of input from any other will besides his own. He created the Traveller by trying to preserve Veronica in a Traveller's body, and in doing so inadvertently restarted the very thing that he had sought to put a stop to.
It's...
Whereas the Traveller's creation was a result of the Pathfinder's failure, Kathy was born of Gaspar Blackwood's success. Yet, in the end, the two experiments bore incredible similarities. Project Lazarus, invoking Lazarus of Bethany, who was resurrected by Jesus 4 days after his death, sought to bring Veronica back to life, and through her the human race as a whole. Instead, it revived the vocation, through which human essences were harvested for the collective. The new Gaia project actively sought a similar end, allowing the influence of Velvet Island to spread across the world, and doing so to subsume all of humanity into its new flesh. In Greek mythology, Gaia was the personification of the earth, the mother of all. According to the playwright Euripides, everything which is born by the earth returns to the earth, and everything born from ether returns to the sky. Nothing is destroyed, but it is transformed to another form. Exactly what the cult which occupied Velvet Island's House of Always believed. Which is why, to preserve their numbers as constant, whenever a new acolyte entered the house, one of the elders would descend to be consumed by and become one with the island. Gaia was also the mother of the Titan Cronos, who was given a great stone sickle by his mother in order to castrate his father Uranus and overthrow him. The Pathfinder, who also seeks to overthrow his father in the sense that he is rebelling against the all-powerful collective who made him, carries a sickle as his weapon. But where Cronos was successful in overthrowing his father to become king of the gods, He would go on to perpetuate the same cycle and in turn be overthrown by his own son Zeus. Just as Cronos' mother Gaia had helped him overcome his father, so Zeus's mother Rhea served the same role in Cronos' demise, alongside Gaia, now turned on her own son. The traveller learns that the Pathfinder and the Warden are one and the same, at different points along their path, and that she is Veronica. After he turned on the collective in an attempt to save Veronica, in turn the being that was once Veronica turned on him. She saw the destruction of the loop that they were all trapped in turn accepting humanity's fate as her only salvation, her only escape. Cathy doesn't turn on William as the traveller turns on the Pathfinder, but with the demise of both the creature that William and Cathy merged into and the essence of the island itself, Becca is able to separate her essence from the hybrid in order to provide a way for her father to escape. He had been willing to sacrifice himself in order to stop what was happening, seeing no reason to go on living without his wife and daughter. But she assures him that he still has work to do, and saving him is her final act before dying with the island and all of the consciousnesses it had subsumed. With the Pathfinder defeated, the traveller goes to kill him. If she does so, then her entire past is undone and she drops dead. Veronica, infected and without the Pathfinder trying to save her, turns and becomes an orphan. Alternatively, if she listens to Veronica's pleading and spares the Pathfinder, then he once again takes the infected Veronica and tries to preserve her in the shell of the traveller, beginning the cycle all over again. Only in the New Game Plus ending does the traveller realise that this not only could happen all over again, but has, and chooses to take her past self with her to break the cycle and begin anew. We don't find out exactly what happens in the aftermath of this decision, but the voices we hear at the end serve as a reminder that in the midst of this struggle, the collective prevails, and it would appear that it doesn't take kindly to being defied.
Listen to the will of those who will not speak. And if the tools are not willing, they will be. Their will be considered fold, and the fold removed.
Whether the collective is the embodiment of the change, consuming human essences into a hive mind and using the travellers to collect those who did not initially come under its influence, or some other, taking advantage of the situation, it is very apparent they are not a benevolent force. In their hunger to consume and absorb other minds, and the use of those they take, transformed, as agents to spread their will, there is little to distinguish them from the entity of Velvet Island. Even taking into account the collective's use of technology, including time travel, this is entirely consistent with William's designs only being possible due to Gaspar Blackwood's experiments. Likewise, just as the collective fought the orphans and presented itself as seeking to save humanity, so the Graham family before William presented the preservation of their own privilege through human sacrifice as a duty to prevent exactly the horrors that William sought to bring about. Cronos the New Dawn's Polish pedigree allows it to evoke not just the brutalist aesthetic of Soviet-era Eastern Europe, but also the theme of survival under authoritarian rule, and rival visions of a collectivism that preserves individuality versus one that subsumes it. Not to mention how easy it is to become, or to catalyse, the very thing you are rebelling against. By contrast, Dead of Darkness pits the preservation of aristocratic landowning privilege against the purchasing power of capitalism, the former seeking to sustain itself in relative isolation, little caring for anyone or anywhere else, and the latter seeking to impose itself through globalization. Neither has much care for those hurt or destroyed in their wake, and perhaps our only chance against them is to tear it all down. While Dead of Darkness takes place in a linear timeline, and Cronos in a repeating time loop, both concern themselves with cycles. Just as Cronos overthrew Uranus, and was in turn overthrown by Zeus, So each group occupying Velvet Island saw their predecessors as savages, yet found noble reasoning to justify their own atrocities. Much as the Pathfinder viewed the collective as monstrous, its attempts to save the human race wiping out their actual humanity. So he managed to do the same, his efforts to save Veronica ultimately creating the Traveller, representing everything he had turned his back upon. And all of this stems, ultimately, from the same motive, the same basic need: to live and to belong. In pursuit of these things, we might find our soulmate, build a family, bring together a community, create a thriving society. But equally, we might lose our individuality or steal it from others, oppress, subsume, and do violence, or be the victims of the same. That's the thing about a good horror story, about the ideas that pluck at the dark corners of our mind and keep us awake at night. Fear of the unknown might be the strongest of humankind's fears, as H.P. Lovecraft once claimed. But that fear is all the more potent with just a hint of the familiar. And what is more familiar to the human psyche than the desire to be part of something greater than ourselves? To not be alone. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like. I'm intending to put out new videos talking about horror stories and video games at least once a month, so consider subscribing to keep up to date and make sure you don't miss out. You can get early access to future videos on both this and my other channel by joining my Patreon for as little as £1 a month. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.
Such is our